Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Ehsan Rizvi and I will be continuing on the lecture series that we had today for Ramadan 2022 brought to you by ILM Bani Hashim Society, Mississauga, Ontario. The topic of this series has been societal well-being, and we've been trying to understand the roadmap to self-purification, and not at the individual level, but at the community level or at the societal level. We've talked about our relationship with neighbors. We've talked about how to deal with the extended community, and how our interaction with social networking tools impact our lives and our responsibilities and duties towards others. Today is another interesting topic, and we're going to continue the momentum here. Today is the fifth lecture of the series, and it's going to be about modesty and chastity. These are two core concepts as well that definitely are key elements of any of a roadmap to self-purification. We will cover really what is the concept of modesty under Islam. We will understand what are the rules of hijab for men. Usually it's only taught to be a concept for women, but that's not the case. We're going to be talking about the rules. And then we will also try to examine the necessity of modesty. Why is it really required? Why is it a key element of this roadmap? Why is modesty and chastity required in our lives? And how would it be beneficial for the society at large? What benefits will it bring about? Our understanding is, or the teachings of Islam is that it's going to build an equitable society as a result of these two concepts. So again, as always, we'll start with the Quranic verses, chapter number 24, verse number 30. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kullil mu'minina yaghuddu min absarihim wa yahfazu furujahum zalika azka lahum inna Allaha khabirum bima yasna'un. I'm going to translate this. Again, this is chapter number 24, which is Surah Nur, and verse number 30. And here's the translation. Tell the believing men to cast down their gazes and to guard their private parts. That is more decent for them. Allah is indeed well aware of what they do. So again, as we talked about, the objectives of this talk today, we want to understand what are the rules of hijab for men. Traditionally, it's usually only taken for women, so we're going to be talking about that. And as the verse says, it's recommended for men to cast down, to keep a lower gaze, and this is what we're going to be talking about in more detail as well. So let's start off with modesty. What comes to mind when we talk about modesty? It's being humble, right? Not being too proud of yourself. If you've done something really nice, I mean, it's good to feel good about it, but you don't want to go out there and just draw attention by telling everyone that this is what I did and I need to be validated, I need to be recognized. So that is what is at the boundary of modesty. It's we need to make sure that we are just not tooting our own horn all the time. Like there are certain scenarios when it's actually good to talk about good things that you have done so that it encourages others, but that should be the goal and objective, right? It shouldn't be it shouldn't be for self-recognition, or it shouldn't be for your pride or for your ego, right? So that's the concept of modesty in a nutshell. But if you want to further dissect this, we want to understand, okay, what does it mean when we practice modesty, right? What are these two qualities, modesty and chastity? What does it mean when you actually practically implement this in your life? Well, it also means being decent. So you can say it means being decent in three aspects. What are those three aspects? One is behavior. Pretty obvious, your behavior. How are you conducting yourself? So, okay, that's number one. Number two, speech, how the way you talk. That's number two. And number three is dress. And we're gonna talk about in detail about each of these aspects. But for now, understand that modesty is not just being humble, but it should reflect in your behavior, your speech, and your dress. So basically what it means is essentially you should talk, behave, and dress up in a certain way, in a way that is respectable and as per the concepts and teachings of Islam, right? When we talk about behavior, so let's try to understand and examine what each of the aspects means under the context of modesty and chastity. The behavior, let's understand what it means to be behavior. It's very critical that all our actions that we do, they are reflecting what we have understood or what actually are the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Holy Prophet. We already know that they are our role models in everything that we do. They've already led an exemplary life. For example, they would always respect their elders. That this is one action. This is one aspect of a behavior. Always respect them and make sure you are offering your help and support. And again, it doesn't mean just your family members, doesn't mean people are living with you. It extends to your neighbor, it extends to your community at large as well, to community members. So you gotta show respect to your elders, and this is modesty in behavior, right? Again, once you have done that, let's say you've helped an elderly person carry their groceries to their car, doesn't mean that you now go about, asking for recognition of this act. It's right. Like I said, it's good to talk about it, to share it with others so that others feel motivated to do the same, but to draw attention to yourself, be self-centered about it, to boost your ego, those are the things that you don't want to do, because otherwise it would go in vain. You don't want to be proud in that way that it hurts the basic essence of this action, right? The basic essence of this action is to build in yourself that helpful nature, that supporting nature, so that other people can actually benefit from it, right? So that was in behavior. Let's talk about speech. So we've already talked about it, like, okay, so, but what does it mean being modest with speech? So whenever you're talking to someone, are you polite? Are you kind? Are you gentle? Are you talking over others? Like, these are the things that you need to consider when you're asking yourself whether you're modest in your speech or not. Avoid any foul language. You don't want to make remarks that are offensive to others. You have to be respectful and mindful of everyone around you, everyone who you're talking to. And again, first and foremost, the critical element is that you have to be truthful, right? And you have to make sure that even if you're cracking jokes, you have to make sure that you're not being offensive, you're not hurting someone, you're not making fun of individuals. So basically, you have to, or you should avoid foolish talk, right? So that is going to be modesty in speech. Now, one thing that I should probably also mention is that being modest also means, and this is like a certain type of action, is it means that you're not watching any television programs that are, in which indecent language is being used, for example, right? You want to, or maybe even reading a book. You don't want to read a book in which indecent language is being used, for example, right? Because all these things will impact you, right? And they might normalize these things for you, which you don't want to normalize. I mean, it's important to know what is right and wrong. It is absolutely critical. because otherwise you won't be able to discern, right? So it's important to identify those things, but indulging yourself in a book, let's say, or in a TV show where these things are normalized, indecent language is being, thrown around, that is something that you don't want to do if you want to manifest the modesty in your behavior, right? According to the teachings of Islam, it's best to actually stay away from these things. Now, who better to take this example from other than our Prophet Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? He's a perfect example, right? And he displayed this behavior, this modest and behavior throughout. Like before even announcing and proclaiming his prophethood, he actually displayed that behavior even before that. So that was 40 years. 40 years was a duration when people actually didn't know he was a prophet. He never announced it, he never proclaimed it, and people just respected him because of his behavior, which was extremely modest. He never spoke a word of lie. People trusted him, and remember, this is at a time when the society was very corrupt. People would do anything. People would lie to sell their products. People would lie to get any benefit that they could, and they would deceive people. So this was something which was very commonplace. But in that setting, in that environment, the prophet came and he established and displayed that behavior, which is why he actually got two famous titles that reflected both his truthfulness and his trustworthiness. I'm gonna pause here so that you can remember like those two titles, and then I'm going to give away the answer as well. He was giving two famous titles for his truthfulness and for his trustworthiness, right? So again, I think you probably are now aware of it. You probably must have heard of it a lot of times as well. So one is Sa'adiq and the other one is Amin. He was extremely truthful. People would believe whatever he would say. And there are obviously many stories about it as well, many traditions that actually emphasize on this fact as well. People used to leave their most valuable things with him because they knew that he was trustworthy, and people would just believe whatever he would say because they knew that he would never lie, right? So those are the qualities that he actually displayed and made sure that people were aware of even before proclaiming his prophethood. Now, the third aspect is dress. All right, and Islam has obviously laid down specific rules for this aspect as well. Really, the general idea is, and obviously these are different for both the genders, and we're only going to talk about boys here. And I just want to quickly maybe go over this. Really, it's a little different from females, but let's see what the Quranic verse says. It's and this is the one that we actually recited in the beginning as well. Again, so chapter number 24, verse number 30, Surah An-Nur. I'm just going to read the translation now. Tell the believing men to cast down their gaze and to cover their private parts. That is more decent for them. Allah is indeed well aware of what they do. So basically, and if we analyze this, we've got two commands here. Two kinds of hijab are actually there, at least in this verse. One is hijab of the eyes, because Allah is asking us, Allah is ordering us, commanding us to cast down our gazes. So hijab of the eyes, basically you don't want to see anything that is indecent. You want to lower down your eyes and try to avoid seeing them, and then guard the private parts, or pretty much, which is the hijab of the dress. It's basically the hijab of the eyes, right? So men have been ordered to cast down their gaze, stare away, do not stare from anything that is indecent. That's pretty much it. And then hijab the dress, guard their private parts, wear clothes that are appropriate, and that would constitute a hijab. right? Those two elements for boys. And again, we're only going to be discussing that for now. Obviously, the different rules for both uh, male and female. So now I wanted to mention here one thing, that being chaste and modest doesn't mean that we have to like stay at home and avoid contact with everyone because it's just too hard to not find anyone who would be offended. It just means that, you know, behave in like socially in a way um, that that is appropriate and within the bounds of the religion. And why are we saying it? Like, what this the core concept, the core idea is that everyone is respectful to others. Everyone is trying to be at their best behavior, and this is gonna impact the society. If you are constantly calling people names, making jokes that are indecent, you know, staring at each other, those are things that are not going to do any good. They're only going to do harm, right? So these teachings basically tell us not to indulge in those activities, so that there could be a much better society that is accepting of people in their you know, in their truest sense, right? If you don't support people, if you start making jokes, if you harass someone, that is not going to create a very safe and protective environment, right? People are going to be afraid to speak out, voice their opinions. And that is something that we don't want to have. What we want a society where people can actually achieve their full potential. If you're not giving them the respect that they deserve by being modest, that society is probably not going to prosper, right? Now, our third Imam Ahmadi is obviously aware of what you do, right? So that is something that always should be in the back of our mind, that at the end of the day, you know, whatever actions we do, the way we dress, the way we talk, our behavior, our speech, and our dress, right? All these things, whatever we do, they are being watched. He is aware. And we want to, like, one barometer is like, if you do a certain action, if we dress up in a certain way, if you talk about a certain thing, if you make a joke, we just want to make sure, would this act actually please him or not? Would this action, would this behavioral attribute, whatever it may be, actually draw me closer to him, or actually, you know, create distance between us? And those are some of the questions that you can just quickly ask yourself before doing any action, and that will give you the answer whether or not you should do that action or not, whether that exhibits a modest behavior or not, right? A simple barometer. Now let's also talk about a story. As we said, like, there are tons of examples, stories, narrations. You know, if you study the life of the Holy Prophet, if you study the life of the family of the Holy Prophet, Ahlul Bayt, in Quran, Allah talks about it as well. And he actually talks about a particular story about Prophet Musa, who observed chastity. This story is actually mentioned chapter number 28 from verse number 23 to 25. And let's talk about that story because really exemplifies this behavior of chastity as well. So when Prophet Musa actually arrived from Egypt, he actually stopped to rest just for a while near the wells of Madian. It's a city called Madian, under a tree. So he was just resting under a tree, and he saw, as he was resting, he saw some shepherds giving water to the animals, right? Now, two girls actually were waiting behind all men for their turn as well, so that they can draw some water. The shepherds were obviously all drawing water from the well, but no one was kind of helping those two girls. Those two girls was just, you know, outside of the, and behind those men. And obviously he could see that they wanted to get water for their animals as well. Now, just to give the background, those two girls actually were the daughters of Prophet Shoaib, okay? And because Prophet Shoaib, he was very old, he could not come out himself to actually draw water. So, but he sent his daughters, and these daughters, out of their modesty and chastity, they could not go in between the crowd of men and get water. Okay? So Prophet Musa, as he was resting in a tree, watched this, and he actually came to help the girls get water, and he made sure that he got water for them. So when Prophet Shuaib actually found out that the young man actually had helped his daughter, he actually sent one of the girls to bring Prophet Musa to his home so he could thank him. The girl came to the well, asked to be Prophet Musa if you want to come to their home, and whilst walking towards Prophet Shuaib's house, Prophet Musa again displayed something exemplary. He asked the girl to walk behind him, and show him the way by throwing stone in the direction of the path to be taken, right? So that Prophet Musa was doing this so that because he was trying to be modest and he didn't want to look at her and walk behind her, right? So again, like an exemplary story of how both the daughters of Prophet Shoaib and then Prophet Musa himself displayed that behavior and role model that aspect of chastity for us, right? Again, this is just the story is actually mentioned in the Holy Quran. So we talked about it, we've defined it, what is chastity and modesty. We've talked about some of the rules and the teachings in the religion as well. But why is it important? We've actually touched on it a bit as well, but let's talk about it formally as well. Why is modesty and chastity important? What benefit are we going to get out of this? Number one is the Quranic verse that we talked about. It explained that, you know, the laws of hijab, the laws of modesty are actually there to make us decent, right? That's number one. You, in order for you to be decent, to behave in a decent way, to behave in a way that is respectful towards others, these rules need to be observed. Now, there is a community benefit to it as well. And this is exactly our overarching topic, right? Societal well-being, how to make sure that our community at large is actually benefiting from us as an individual. We're trying to achieve that self-purification, but you're trying to do it so that it impacts the community in a positive way as well. So let's imagine a society where everyone is really modest in their behavior, speech, and dress, and they're applied correctly in a community. This will ensure that everyone's behavior is at their best and everyone's actually respectful towards others. Everyone is accepting of others' behaviors as well. It will be an extremely safe environment for people to achieve their full potential, really. If everyone lived by these rules, we would have a society of mutual respect. You know, I would be free of many sins and vices. These rules are there that will also keep us you know, away from bad deeds, right? So really, it's important that we try ourselves to be modest and chaste, and we talked about some things that we can do as well. And once we try to practice this will become a habit as well forever, right? Now, in addition to behaving, dressing, and speaking in a modest way, our thoughts, you know, the way we think, that should also be must be modest. A modest heart is one that does not think about evil actions and thinks about of performing good actions for the sake of Allah, right? So, for example, a person is dressed up in a nice way in the correct hijab, but then his language is not decent. You know, he's cracking jokes that are hurting people, then this is considered sin, right? In the same way, if a person giving lots of charity, but in his mind, he thinks that he's only doing it to show it off to other people so that people can validate him and recognize him as a big person or something like that, then his heart is not modest, right? So those things are not acceptable, right? If you're doing a good action, but your heart is not pure. And when I say pure, it means that you don't have the intention to actually do good for the community, but it's actually self-centered, and that is not acceptable, right? So ask yourself, like another test would be, we talked about like a test, a quick test that, oh, if I do something, whether the 12th mom will be pleased by it or not, right? That's one test. But like if you want to understand, if you've done some action now, let's say after the action, what do you do? Do you talk loudly to gain attention? Do you do that? Are your conversations always focused on yourself? Are you dressing in a way to actually attract attention of others around you? Are you trying to plan ways where you can actually gather attention, get people to notice you, and maybe even recognize you or admire you? Are you, um, you know, valuing the approval, excessively valuing the approval of other people, or do you do it for the Almighty, right? So if any of those questions, if you're answering in yes to any of these questions, and maybe you need to rethink about your strategy. If you need to think about how you can purify your heart so that when you're doing these nice actions, you're actually also rewarded, and you're actually performing those actions for the right reasons. So sometimes people will just give a charity because they want to be recognized. Well, that's not a very good intention. You want to make sure that you're trying to be respectful and you're supporting the community so that they can benefit, and you're doing it yourself so that you can be pure as well and spiritually more connected. Otherwise, it will have a reverse impact, right? Now, the Quran again tells us the story of Prophet Yusuf, who actually displayed great modesty, right? There is an event, there's an entire story in Surah Yusuf. And we see there that the Prophet Yusuf, even though he was threatened to engage in a not so modest behavior, he did not give in to the temptation, right? And he was actually even sent to the prison because of Israel, but Allah, the Almighty, rewarded him by making him the leader of the Egypt. So keep that in mind as well, that this does not go unrewarded. If you're doing something for the pleasure of Allah, He will reward you. And in the case of Prophet Yusuf, it was that he was made the leader of Egypt, right? Now, we've talked about three things, talked about behavior, speech, and we've talked about how to dress up. I think this is a good time to conclude this concept here. Just to recap quickly, modesty basically means being decent in your behavior, speech, and dress. And we've talked about all the rules that Islam has really laid down. It's for both males and females. We want to be doing those behaviors because it prevents us from sins, from being committed. We talked about the story of Prophet Musa that is actually talked in the Quran as well. We talked about a couple of Quranic verses that actually talk about the rules of hijab for men. So all these things that we study about basically tell us how society can also benefit from modesty and chastity, and therefore we should always try to practice it so that it becomes a habit for us forever. So this is it for today. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and feel free to send your questions to the society, to Babel ILM. You can contact us. And hopefully you're finding these to be beneficial. And I hope you're having a blessed Ramazan. Inshallah, I'll talk to you tomorrow on another topic, but with the same overarching topic, which is societal well-being. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.